She called the Vampire King by mistake. By dawn, her restaurant was surrounded. The bond with her echo blood didn't just heal the king, it's making him a daywalker and reawakening his volatile emotions. But as this new, unstable power grows, what is it doing to her? And what will he become when he's no longer a creature of the night? Chapter 1. The digital clock on the oven read 2:47 a.m. Clara was alone, as she always seemed to be, in the heart of her failing bistro, the Sage Leaf. The small, once charming space was now a mausoleum of her dreams, haunted by the red-stamped final notices littering the counter. She was the quiet one, the forgettable sister, a fact punctuated by the postcard of a cruise ship currently stuck to the fridge. Her entire family had left for the Caribbean 2 days ago. They had forgotten to invite her. Miles away, in a sterile penthouse of glass and steel that punctured the city's skyline, King Caius presided over a different kind of silence. He was ancient, cold, and profoundly bored. His regent, Marcus, presented reports with quiet deference, but Caius barely heard him. The data, shipping routes, bloodstock logistics, financial acquisitions, was meaningless. He had not truly felt anything in a century. His immortality was a prison of cold, rational control, and he was weary of it. The sound of shattering glass ripped Clara from her numb inventory of debts. A brick skidded across the hardwood floor. 3 men ducked under the broken frame of the front window, led by a man whose smile never reached his eyes. Milo, Clara breathed, backing against the counter. Clara, he mocked. The place is looking a little empty. Just like your bank account. He and his thugs fanned out. One swept a rack of wine glasses to the floor. The other kicked the leg of a chair, splintering it. I just need more time, Clara pleaded. Milo grabbed a framed culinary certificate from the wall and examined it. Time's up. He tossed it, and it hit the floor with a dull crack. He advanced on her, shoving her hard. Clara stumbled, her hand flying out to catch herself on the display case. The one they hadn't broken yet. The glass spiderwebbed and gave way. A sharp, searing pain shot up her arm. She looked down and saw her palm sliced open, blood welling dark and immediate. Milo loomed over her. You've got 24 hours to get me my money, or we burn this place to the ground. With you in it. They left. Clara was left alone on the floor, bleeding and terrified, the scent of her own blood mixing with the aroma of stale coffee. Chapter 2. Trembling, she fumbled for her phone. She had to call someone. Her ex, Jason, the useless charmer who had co-signed the loan and then vanished, was the only name that came to mind. Her hands were shaking so violently she could barely unlock the screen. Blood smeared across the glass, obscuring the keypad. She tried to dial his number from memory, her vision blurred by tears of panic and pain. The call connected. In his penthouse, Caius flinched. Not at a sound, but at a presence. On his obsidian desk, a phone, a heavy, black rotary relic that hadn't been wired to any network in 70 years, began to ring. It was a shrill, impossible sound that shattered his apathy. Marcus froze. My king, that is the dormant line. Caius stared at it, annoyed. Who dares? He lifted the receiver. Clara, hysterical, didn't register the voice that answered, a voice like velvet and steel. She just sobbed. Please, you have to help me. The Sage Leaf Bistro. 1428 Elm Street is going to burn it. I'm bleeding, oh God, I'm bleeding. On the other end of the line, Caius went utterly still. He heard the raw terror in her voice, but beneath it, he sensed something else. Impossibly, carried across the line by her desperation, he caught the scent of her blood. It was not the coppery, mundane scent of a human. It was an echo, a familiar resonance he hadn't tasted in 1,000 years. It was the scent of his own lost line. Something ancient in him, something he'd buried under a mountain of ice and control, snapped. I am coming, he commanded, and the line went dead. Clara stared at her phone, confused. Who had she called? She staggered to her broken window, looking out at the empty street. The first, sick grey light of dawn was beginning to break the horizon. And then she saw them. One by one, headlights extinguished. The entire street, from one end of the block to the other, was lined with black, luxury cars. They had appeared from nowhere, silent as the grave. Pale, unblinking figures in immaculate dark suits stood on every corner, their heads all turned in one direction. They were all watching her bistro. Chapter 3. He didn't use the broken window or the locked door. One moment, the bistro was empty save for her, the next, he was there. Caius moved with a speed that blurred the air, stopping a foot from her. He was tall, beautiful, and terrifying. His eyes, a strange, luminous amber red, were fixed on her. He ignored the wreckage, the shattered glass, the overturned tables. He went directly to her, his focus absolute. Gently, with a touch that was both ice and fire, he took her bleeding hand. His thumb brushed the cut, and his nostrils flared. "Show me," he said, his voice a low vibration, "who did this?" Clara, trapped in his gaze, could only whisper Milo's name. Caius released her hand and turned. He made one call, speaking in a language she didn't recognize. By noon, Milo and his entire crew had vanished from the city, their apartment scrubbed, their records erased. His regent, Marcus, was stunned, appearing at the bistro as his king surveyed the damage. "My king, you have broken a century of silence. The council will be in upheaval. She is a human." She called the line. Caius said, his back to Marcus. His gaze was on the bloody phone Clara had dropped. "She is mine." Later, in his penthouse, Caius worked. He was a rational creature. This was an anomaly, and anomalies must be understood. The number she had dialed was not Jason's. Her bloody fingers had slipped, dialing a sequence that had not been a number for millennia. It was a magical summons, a ritual of blood and sound keyed to his specific, lost bloodline, a line he believed had been rendered extinct. He looked at the security feed from the bistro, at the small, bleeding woman. She was a descendant. A human branch of his family, so diluted by time he hadn't sensed her. She had echo blood. Chapter 4. Clara's life was overturned. A sign appeared on her bistro door, closed for repairs. A crew of silent, efficient workers arrived and began to rebuild it, their work funded by an anonymous source. Her bills were paid. But she was not free. She was no longer invisible, she was a spectacle. Everywhere she went, she was flanked by two of the pale figures in dark suits. They were his Umbra, his personal guard, and they never spoke. Caius moved her to his penthouse for her safety. There, surrounded by cold marble and skyline views, he told her the truth. "I am a vampire," he said, stating it as one might state the weather. He explained the magical line. "Your blood is an echo of mine. A human branch of my lost family, dormant for generations. By calling the line, by bleeding as you did it, you sent up a flare." He looked at her, his amber-red eyes unblinking. "And you have just become the most valuable human on the continent." He was not the only one who had felt the summons. A rival, Corvus, leader of a fanatical coven known as the Ordo Dracal, had also sensed the line open. He had been searching for an echo blood for centuries. He believed her blood was the key to an ancient prophecy, the creation of a true day-walking vampire. Chapter 5. A week later, Clara's perfect sister, Christine, returned from her cruise, tanned and unapologetic. She found Clara not in her modest apartment, but in Caius's penthouse, surrounded by a luxury that defied belief. Christine's smile was thin, her eyes filled with a poisonous jealousy. "Clara," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "My goodness! What could a man like that possibly want with you?" The question, her lifelong wound, barely had time to sting. The next day, Corvus's forces attacked. They were fast, brutal, and unafraid of the Umbra. They tried to snatch Clara during a protected shopping trip. It was chaos. Clara witnessed real supernatural violence, the blur of speed, the sound of concrete cracking under inhuman blows. Caius appeared himself, a whirlwind of focused rage. One of Corvus's lieutenants fired a projectile. Caius shoved Clara to safety, taking the hit himself. It was a silver-tipped dart, and it lodged deep in his shoulder. He hissed, a sound of pure venom, and staggered. Back in the penthouse, he tore the dart out, but the wound did not heal. A black, venomous tracery spread from the puncture. He was weakening. "Silver!" he rasped, laced with wolfsbane. Clara, in a panic, grabbed the dart to inspect it, cutting her own hand on its silver-slicked edge. "You're poisoned." "Stay back," he ordered, but she ignored him, pressing her bleeding palm against his wound to apply pressure. The moment her blood mixed with the poison on his skin, the room filled with the sound of hissing steam. The black lines receded. The silver, slick with her blood, turned to harmless dust. Caius stared at her, his detachment finally cracking, replaced by a raw, stunned awe. Her echo blood was an antidote. She was not just a key, she was a cure. Clara, seeing the look in his eyes, made her choice. She was not leaving. Chapter 6. The event changed Caius. His reawakened emotions terrified him. He had not felt this volatile, this protective, since a lover's betrayal centuries ago. He reverted to what he knew: control. He became possessive, cold, and distant, locking Clara in the penthouse for her own good. He was terrified of what he felt, and more terrified of losing her. Corvus, having failed to take her, attacked her vulnerability. He attacked her dream. He burned the Sage Leaf Bistro to the ground. Clara watched it on the news, her life's work reduced to a smoking pile of ash. She was devastated. This was the opening Corvus needed. He found Christine, stewing in her jealousy. He preyed on her feelings of inadequacy, promising her the beauty and power she craved. He glamoured her, and she eagerly agreed. Christine, using their sisterly bond to bypass the Umbra's suspicions, lured Clara from the penthouse with a desperate, false story. The moment Clara was in the open, Corvus's forces took her. Chapter 7. The moment Clara was taken, Caius felt it. The bond, forged by the summons and sealed by her blood, snapped taut like a wire. His cold, logical detachment did not just crack, it shattered into a million pieces. The bored, ancient king was gone. In his place was a predator. Marcus rushed in to find the penthouse windows blown outward, the air vibrating with a power that hadn't been unleashed in ages. "My king!" Caius turned, his eyes no longer amber-red, but solid, burning gold. "Burn the city," he whispered, his voice shaking with a primal rage. "Find her. Now." Clara, meanwhile, was in Corvus's lair, a high-tech, fortified glass tower. She was terrified, but the woman who had cowered before Milo was gone. She was furious. "You'll never get away with this," she spat, her voice shaking but strong. "He will find you." "Oh, I'm counting on it," Corvus smiled, preparing his ritual. He made a deep, ritualistic cut on her arm, letting her blood drip into a silver chalice. The assault began. Caius and his Umbra didn't bother with stealth. They hit the tower at full force. It was a brutal, modern, supernatural war, fought with ancient rage and high-caliber weapons. Chapter 8. Caius found her on the tower's roof. Corvus stood waiting, the chalice in his hand. He drank Clara's blood and smiled as the power surged through him. The two vampires met. Caius was fueled by rage, but Corvus, empowered by the echo blood, was stronger, faster. He slammed Caius against the rooftop's edge, the wind howling around them. Corvus raised a silver blade for the killing blow. "No!" Clara screamed. Seeing Caius, this ancient, powerful creature, about to die for her, the forgettable sister, she scrambled forward. She was not a warrior. She had no powers. But she had her blood. With all her strength, she threw herself at Corvus, not at his body, but at his face, smearing her own blood from the cut on her arm directly across his eyes and mouth. The effect was instantaneous. Her blood, an antidote to his kind, was pure acid to Corvus. He shrieked, dropping the blade as his skin dissolved, his body burning from the inside out. He crumbled to ash. In the battle's aftermath, Caius slumped, weakened from the fight and the proximity to the silver. He looked at Clara, his emotions raw and exposed. Clara understood. She knelt before him and, with no hesitation, offered her wrist. "You're hurt. Heal." He drank from her, and it was not the desperate act of a predator, but a sacred, willing exchange. The bond was sealed. In the distance, Christine, her glamour broken, was being led away by the Umbra, banished from the city. Dawn was breaking. Caius and Clara stood in the smoking ashes of her restaurant. "It's all gone," she whispered, the loss still aching. Caius took her hand, his own hand, no longer cold. "Ash is what you build empires from." He produced a document from his coat. It was the deed, not just to her lot, but to the entire city block. "Rebuild," he said, his voice soft, "and rule it. With me." He brushed the hair from her face, his thumb tracing her jawline. "My queen." As he spoke the words, a tingling heat spread from her wrist. Clara looked down. There, flaring to life on her skin as if drawn in ink of fire, was an intricate, dormant tattoo, the mark of his lost bloodline. Chapter 9. The heat on her wrist was the first thing Clara registered, a tingling warmth that spread like liquid gold through her veins. She looked down. The intricate lines, like fiery ink, were no longer just a flare, they were settling into her skin, weaving a complex pattern of a serpent and a crown that she somehow knew was permanent. It didn't hurt. It thrummed, a low, resonant vibration that echoed the beat of her own heart. A sound, sharp and quiet, escaped Caius's throat. It was the first truly unguarded sound she had ever heard him make. The dawn light, which should have been weakening him, seemed to sharpen his focus as he stared at her arm. He reached out, not with the possessive grip of a king, but with a reverent, trembling touch. His fingers, still cold from the night, traced the glowing crest. The sigil of the first line. He breathed, his voice raw with an ancient awe that stunned her. "I thought it was lost to myth. I haven't seen it on living skin since before the fall of Rome." She met the gaze of the most prominent shadow, the one that seemed to lead the others. Her voice dropped, echoing with the memory of the fire and the righteous fury she'd felt. "And I am the hand that destroyed Corvus while he was empowered by my own blood." A complete, shocked silence fell. The shadows actually recoiled. They had assumed Caius was responsible for Corvus's end. This was impossible. As Clara stood in the center of their collective shock, the sigil on her wrist, as if in agreement, pulsed. It was not a flare of light this time, but a deep, hot pulse of power, a wave of pure, crimson energy that washed through the room. The shadowy projections flickered violently, as if struck. Clara had not felt it, but she saw their reaction. She saw the fear in their spectral forms. Caius stepped up beside her, placing his hand over hers, his thumb brushing the sigil. He looked out at his terrified council, his eyes glowing with a feral, possessive pride. "Apologize," he commanded, his voice soft, "to your queen." Chapter 11. The black marble of the conclave chamber seemed to absorb all sound. The word queen echoed in the oppressive silence, a stone thrown into a deep, dark well. The 12 holographic projections of the council elders did not move, but the whispering shadows around them intensified, a dry, agitated hiss. Finally, one shadow, darker and more defined than the rest, solidified. Its features were those of a gaunt man with eyes like empty sockets. "Queen." The voice was like dry parchment scraping stone. "You have lost your mind, Caius. You have brought a mortal vessel into this sacred place, tainted by her living breath." A vessel of the first line, another shadow interjected, a danger. A prophecy we have spent millennia ensuring never came to pass. "And you would call it queen?" The first shadow, the gaunt one, pressed on, his voice a sneer. "She is a pet. A new, interesting toy for a bored king who has broken his isolation. You will hand her over to the council for study. She is a threat to the Accords and our entire world." The air temperature in the chamber plummeted. A thin layer of frost, sparkling like crushed diamonds, began to trace the marble floor around Caius's feet. His control was not just broken, it was disintegrating. The word, Caius whispered, his voice so deadly calm it was more terrifying than a shout, was apologize. "We will not." The gaunt shadow boomed, his form swelling with indignation. "You will answer to us for this breach. You will surrender the mortal." Caius was about to unleash. Clara could feel it, a raw, unmaking power building in him that threatened to tear the very foundations of the building apart. He was going to start a war, right here, for her. And she realized, in a moment of sharp, crystalline clarity, that this was not a fight. It was a negotiation. And a king's rage was a terrible negotiating tactic. "My king," she said, her voice cutting through the rising tension. Caius froze, the frost receding a half-inch. He looked down at her, his amber-red eyes so bright with power they were almost white. He was shocked that she would dare to interrupt him. She gave his arm a small, firm squeeze, a gesture of comfort, not of control, and then she let go. She stepped away from his side, back into the center of the room. She was no longer his attachment, she was her own entity. She turned to the council. "He is right. You will not apologize to me as your queen." Caius's head snapped toward her, a look of profound, almost betrayed confusion on his face. The shadows on the council wall settled, sensing a crack in their king's newfound solidarity. "I am not your queen," Clara continued, her voice ringing with an authority she didn't know she possessed. "You have not earned the right to call me that. Nor have I." She locked eyes with the gaunt, sneering shadow. "A council, I assume, governs. It maintains order. It handles threats." She began to pace, just 2 steps one way, 2 steps the other. "So, tell me, esteemed elders. Where were you when the Ordo Dracal was growing in power? Where were you when its leader, Corvus, was actively hunting for the very bloodline you are now so desperate to study?" She stopped, planting her feet. "He was your problem. A rogue coven under your jurisdiction. And you were too blind, too complacent, or too weak to stop him. He burned my life to the ground, my mortal life, while you whispered in your shadow chambers." She held up her hand, the sigil dark and clear on her skin. "I was the one who ended him. I solved the problem you allowed to fester. You will not apologize to me as your queen." Her voice dropped, and the last vestige of the forgettable sister was burned away by the cold fire in her eyes. "You will apologize to me as the woman who had to clean up your mess." Utter, profound silence. The shadows were not just quiet, they were stunned. They had been prepared to battle a king's rage. They were utterly unprepared for a human's audit. They had no protocol for this. From behind her, Clara heard a new sound. It was low, dark, and utterly delighted. Caius was chuckling. In 2 swift strides, he was beside her, not in front of her. He wrapped a possessive arm around her waist, pulling her back against his side. He was no longer a monarch defending a subject, he was a partner standing with his equal. He looked at the frozen, silent council, his eyes bright with a pride that was almost manic. "The audience is over," he announced, his voice casual. "You may send your formal, written apologies to the Lady Clara, descendant of the first line. Or, if you prefer, you may send your formal declarations of war. I find, suddenly, that I am entirely ambivalent as to which you choose." He didn't wait for a reply. He snapped his fingers. The 12 projections did not fade, they were severed, vanishing with a sound like a high-voltage switch being thrown, leaving the chamber in an echoing, empty silence. The lights in the room slowly warmed. Clara's legs finally began to tremble. Caius turned her to face him, his hands holding her arms, his gaze still shining with that wild, fierce pride. That, he breathed, his smile a flash of white, was magnificent. Chapter 12. Caius's hands were still on her arms, his gaze locked on her face. That brief, dangerous smile of his was aimed at her, and it held more warmth than the sun-filled penthouse. The last of her adrenaline evaporated, and the trembling in her legs became a violent shudder. He felt it instantly. His smile vanished, replaced by a sharp, focused concern. The king who had just dismissed an ancient council was gone, and in his place was someone else. "You're shaking," he said, his voice now a low, concerned rumble. He didn't let her go. Instead, his grip steadied her as he guided her from the cold, empty conclave chamber. It's just catching up," Clara whispered, feeling foolish. "I'm fine." "You are human," he countered, not as an insult, but as a fact he was just now, after centuries, relearning. "You have been poisoned, hunted, abducted, and have just stared down 12 of the most powerful beings on the planet. You are not fine. The war is over," he confirmed. "But the work is just beginning. Which brings me to this." He touched his desk, and the holographic city grid zoomed in on a single, smoking, ash-filled square. Her block. The demolition crews are already there, he said. The plans are being drawn. Caius, that's too fast, she said, setting the plate down. I don't even know what I want. Don't you? He held up a datapad. She took it. It was a design. A building. It was sleek, modern, and beautiful, made of dark steel and reclaimed wood, with an entire wall of glass facing the street. But it wasn't just a bistro. It was 3 stories high, with a rooftop garden. The sign, rendered in elegant, simple script, read the sage leaf. It's huge, she breathed, scrolling through the renderings of a massive, state-of-the-art kitchen. And, are these apartments? Above the restaurant, yes, he said. And a secure, private level below. It is not just a place of business, Clara. It's a statement. It's a fortress. It will be your seat of power. A neutral ground where the mortal and immortal worlds can meet, run by the only person who now belongs to both. She looked up at him, stunned by the scale of his vision. You don't just want me to rebuild my restaurant. You want me to build an embassy. I want you to build your empire, he corrected her, his voice low. Right beside mine. He stepped closer, his gaze searching her face. You said something in the conclave. You called my confrontation and negotiation. You were about to start a war, she said. It wasn't the right move. No, he agreed, his eyes bright with that same, fierce pride from the chamber. It wasn't. For 1,000 years, I have had subjects, servants, regents, and enemies. I have had people who follow me out of fear, or out of duty. He reached out, his fingers lightly brushing the back of her hand, just below the sigil. But I have never, until today, had a partner. Someone who stood beside me, not behind me. Someone who saw my worst impulses and was not afraid to calm them. He stepped back, a shadow of his old self returning as he seemed to realize how much he had revealed. He turned to the window, looking at the city lights. There is one other thing, he said, his voice quiet. This afternoon, I stood at this window. The sun was less painful. Clara stared at his back. What? Like, because of my blood? The antidote. It does more than heal, he murmured, almost to himself. The prophecy Corvus was chasing, a day-walking vampire, he believed your blood was a key to be weaponized. He was wrong. He turned to face her, his expression a complex map of discovery and a dawning, possessive hunger. It is not a key, he said. It is a bond. And it is changing me. Chapter 14. Clara stared at him, the half-eaten plate in her hands forgotten. The implications of his words settled on her, heavy as a shroud. Changing you, she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. The day-walking vampire. The prophecy. Corvus, he wasn't wrong, was he? He was wrong about how, Caius corrected, his voice tight. He stepped away from the window, moving into the center of the room. The dying light of the sunset cast his features in sharp relief. He thought your blood was a component. A consumable, like a drug, that would grant him power. He believed he could take it. He looked at his own hand, flexing it as if it were new. He was a fool. It is not a thing to be taken. It is a resonance. A bond. When you healed me, you did not just cure the poison. You awoke the sigil. You anchored my line, which lives in you, back to me. It is strengthening me. Mending the ancient frailties of my kind. Clara's mind was racing. My blood is the antidote to silver. And, the bond, is the antidote to the sun. It would appear so, he said, a note of scientific, almost obsessive, curiosity in his voice. I have not felt this, vital, in millennia. He met her gaze, and the scientific curiosity was eclipsed by something far older. That primal, possessive hunger she had seen on the rooftop. It was back, but now it was tenfold, no longer diluted by his cold detachment. She knew the question she had to ask. It hung in the air between them, thick and sharp. For this to work, she said, her voice steady, for the bond to strengthen you. It's not just about me being in the same room, is it? He did not move, but his stillness was that of a predator sighting its prey. No. You have to feed from me. The silence that followed was so absolute she could hear the hum of the city's power grid. When I drank from you at the tower, he finally said, his voice a low, velvet rasp, it was a healing. A necessity to survive. This would be different. He took a step toward her. She did not step back. It would be a sustenance. A reinforcement of the bond. It would tie us together in a way that makes the conclave summons seem like a passing formality. He was struggling with the words, as if they were foreign. Clara, my control, where you are concerned, is unreliable. I have not felt this need in my entire existence. It is a new and violent hunger. I am afraid of what it would do. He, the king, was afraid. Afraid of his own need for her. The revelation settled in her, not as a fear, but as a deep, profound understanding. This was the core of their new reality. He was no longer the detached, bored monarch. He was the unstable, emotionally alive king of his character arc, and she was the cause. You called me your partner, she said, setting her plate down. She walked the few steps that separated them, stopping directly in front of him, forcing him to look down at her. Partners don't let each other remain weak, she said. Partners don't let each other be afraid. She lifted her hand, not the one with the sigil, but the other, her pulse fluttering just beneath the skin of her wrist. She held it out to him. An offering. A choice. He stared at her wrist, his breath catching. He was trembling. This woman, who he had found bleeding on a bistro floor, was now offering him the one thing in the world he craved, and she was doing it not from fear, but from a position of absolute power. Clara, he rasped, his eyes flashing from amber to a burning red. You do not know what you are asking. Once this is done. I know, she said, her voice firm. I am not invisible. And I am not afraid of you. He lifted his hand, his fingers shaking, and slowly, reverently, reached for her wrist. His touch was a jolt of electricity, his skin searingly cold against her warmth. He turned her arm, his gaze fixed on the delicate blue veins. He bent his head, his lips parting slightly. The soft chime of an intercom echoed through the penthouse. Caius froze, a low, animalistic growl of pure fury rumbling in his chest. My king, Marcus's voice said, tinny and terrified over the speaker. Forgive this intrusion. I would not accept. Caius snapped, his head jerking up, his eyes blazing red. Speak, Marcus, and let this be the last time you interrupt me this night. My apologies, my king. But we have a problem. Marcus's voice was tight with urgency. The apology from the London Coven, it was not an apology. It was a summons. They've invoked the ancient compact of covens. They are demanding you present the echo blood to them. In London. Immediately. Chapter 15. The burning red in Caius's eyes did not fade. It turned flat, cold, and absolute. The simmering hunger that had drawn him to Clara's wrist was instantly channeled into a pinpoint of glacial rage. He did not let go of her wrist immediately. His grip tightened for a fraction of a second, a possessive, involuntary clench, before he seemed to master himself. He released her hand. Clara let her arm fall to her side, the warmth of his near touch evaporating, leaving her skin feeling cold. The intimate, supercharged bubble they had been in was not just popped, it was obliterated. She wasn't frightened by his anger, she was frustrated. The intercom chimed again, a tiny, nervous sound. Caius turned his head toward the speaker, his voice a low, lethal promise. If you are not gone in 5 seconds, Marcus. The compact, my king. Marcus's voice was strained. It hasn't been invoked in 500 years. It is a species-level threat. They claim the echo blood is that threat. Caius cut the connection with a savage slash of his hand across the desk console. Who are they? Clara asked, her voice calm, pulling him back. He began to pace, his movements no longer smooth but sharp, caged. The London Coven is one of the 3 prime covens. Ancient, powerful, and, until now, utterly silent. And this compact? It is a relic, he spat. A mutual defense pact from the Dark Ages, created to unite us against the mortal inquisitions. To invoke it is to claim a threat against our entire species. And to refuse its summons is to declare oneself rogue. An enemy. So, they're not asking, Clara said, processing. They are commanding. They think I am a threat to all vampires. They think what Corvus thought, Caius said, stopping to face her. That your blood is a weapon. A key. They want to study it. Contain it. Control it. He shook his head, the predatory instinct rising. They will not have you. I will send Marcus with my refusal. I will break the compact. I will prepare for war. No, Clara said. He froze. No. That's what you said you'd do with your council. You'd burn the city, you'd start a war. And I told you it was the wrong move. This is the same, just bigger. She walked to the holographic map of the city. Her city. Her block. You told me to build an empire, an embassy. You can't do that by hiding. You can't declare me your queen and then refuse to let anyone see me. This is not my council, Clara, he thundered, the air in the room crackling. They are not cowards to be stared down. They are ruthless. They are the old law. They will not apologize. They will try to take you. Let them try, she said. He stared at her, his shock visible. She turned to face him, her resolve as hard as the diamond light of the city below. They called me a thing. The Echo Blood. They demanded you present me. They're expecting you to either cower and obey, or fly into a rage and declare war. Both of which, I'm guessing, would give them cause to act against you. To brand you a tyrant or a traitor. She was right. He saw the political trap for what it was. So we give them a third option, she said, her voice dropping, one they never saw coming. We don't refuse. We accept. Clara. He warned, stepping toward her. We don't go because they summoned us, she said, cutting him off, her own power rising to meet his. We go because we choose to. We are not answering their summons. We are granting them an audience. We will go to London. And you will not present me. You will accompany me. And we will show them exactly what this bond means. We will show them true power, not just a king's old-world rage. Caius looked at her, his rage, his hunger, and his volatile emotions momentarily eclipsed by a stunning, profound awe. The forgettable sister was gone. In her place stood a strategist. A partner. A queen. His features softened, his smile returning, dark, dangerous, and delighted. They will regret this, he murmured, not as a threat, but as a simple, undeniable fact. He walked to his console. Marcus, he said, his voice now calm and clear. Inform the London Coven that we have received their concerns. Lady Clara and I will depart for London tonight. My king, my lady. Marcus stammered, clearly in shock. It will be done. The line cut. The room was silent again. The new crisis was set. Caius turned back to Clara. The political urgency had passed, but the other, more primal urgency remained. The air was still thick with the interrupted moment. His gaze was intense, and it fell from her eyes, down her throat, to the wrist she had offered him. London will be a considerable risk, he said, his voice dropping back into that low, velvet rasp. My strength will be needed. And the bond is still untended. He took a step, closing the distance between them. We have a few hours before we fly. Clara looked at him, her partner, her king, her anchor. The unresolved, violent hunger in his eyes was a mirror of her own newfound strength. Then we'd better be prepared, she said, and slowly, deliberately, she lifted her hand and offered him her wrist again. Chapter 16. His control did not break. It focused. This time, there was no hesitation. His hand, now perfectly steady, closed around her wrist. His touch was not a question, it was an acceptance. A claim. He drew her arm toward him, his gaze locked on the pale, delicate skin. Clara's heart hammered, a frantic drum against her ribs, but she did not pull away. She held her ground. She held his burning, red-gold gaze. He lowered his head. He did not lunge. He paused, his lips hovering just above her pulse, and inhaled. She felt the ghost of his breath, a cool wisp of air, and then his scent, a shockingly clean, cold scent, like ancient stone and ozone before a storm. A low, involuntary sound of pure need rumbled in his chest, and then, he pressed his mouth to her skin. Clara gasped. It was not pain. It was a sharp, sudden jolt, like ice and lightning, that shot straight from her wrist to her heart. His fangs, razor-sharp, pierced her skin with a precision that was almost surgical, and then the true shock began. It was not a taking. It was an exchange. The moment he began to draw, the sigil on her other wrist blazed with a sudden, searing heat, as if it had been plunged into a forge. An answering jolt of energy, hot and golden, left her, flowing through the sigil and into him. She felt it, a torrent of warmth, of life, of her essence, pouring into him. And in return, she felt him. It was a tidal wave of sensation. She felt his centuries of profound, crushing loneliness, a cold so deep it was an ache. She felt his crumbling detachment, and the sheer, violent terror he'd had of his reawakened emotions. And beneath it all, a white-hot, burning core of possessiveness and a new, stunning, reverent awe of her. A deep, satisfied groan echoed from his throat. His grip on her tightened, his other hand coming up to brace her waist, pulling her flush against him. He was no longer just a king, he was a starving man at a banquet. The violent hunger he'd warned her about was there, but he was mastering it, channeling it, even as he drank. She felt the exact moment the bond sealed. The flow of energy stabilized. The weakness from the sun, the ancient frailty in his blood, she felt it all mend. She felt his power, no longer a volatile, explosive thing, but a deep, steady, oceanic roar. He pulled back, his breath ragged. His lips were stained red. He looked down at her, and his eyes, they were no longer amber red. They were a solid, brilliant, living gold, blazing with a vitality that was utterly, terrifyingly beautiful. His fangs, slick with her blood, retracted slowly. He didn't look sated. He looked complete. Clara felt dizzy, but not weak. She felt light, as if she were humming with a low-grade electrical current. The sigil on her wrist was warm, its black lines seeming even darker against her skin. Caius slowly, reverently, raised her wrist to his lips and pressed a kiss to the two tiny puncture marks, sealing them. He looked at her, his golden eyes unblinking, his ancient face remade with the fierce, burning life she had put there. Clara, he breathed, his voice rough. He touched his own chest, over his heart, as if feeling a new sensation. I know, she whispered. She was no longer just his anchor. She was his source. He stood to his full height, a different creature entirely. The bored monarch was a distant memory. The raging predator was leashed. This was the king, fully realized. Now, he said, his voice a low, confident thunder that vibrated through the floor. We can go to London. He offered her his arm, not as a ruler to a subject, but as an equal. An escort. Clara looked at the arm, then up at his face. This was it. The partnership, sealed in blood. She placed her hand in the crook of his elbow. Together, they turned and walked out of the office to where Marcus and the Umbra waited, their faces a mask of disciplined shock. They were not just seeing their king, they were seeing their king, reborn. And beside him, the woman who had remade him. The journey to London had truly begun. Chapter 17. The flight was not a flight. It was a dislocation. One moment, Clara was standing in the penthouse, her hand on Caius's arm. The next, she was stepping out into the cold, damp air of a London night. The transition was seamless, a fold in the shadows, and it left her stomach behind for a dizzying second. They stood on a private rooftop helipad overlooking the Thames. The air was thick with ancient stone, river mist, and the smell of rain. Unlike the sharp, modern energy of his city, London felt heavy. The city lights were muted by fog, as if the entire metropolis was shrouded. Caius stood beside her, his new, vital energy a palpable aura. He was a beacon of warmth in the chill, his golden eyes scanning the skyline. He no longer seemed uncomfortable, he seemed dominant. They're here, he murmured. Two figures emerged from the shadows of a stairwell access. They wore no Umbra-like suits, but exquisitely tailored woolen overcoats, their bearing stiff with centuries of aristocratic pride. They were vampires, but of a different, older cut than Caius's modern faction. King Caius, the lead figure, a pale man with a severe, hawk-like face, said. His voice was clipped, British, and utterly devoid of warmth. He did not bow. "We are pleased you saw fit to answer the summons." "I saw fit to grant an audience, Lord Alistair," Caius replied, his voice a smooth, dangerous counterpoint. "Do not mistake my presence for obedience." Alistair's thin lips tightened. His gaze slid to Clara, dismissive and cold. "The coven is prepared. You will be escorted to the chamber. The vessel will be taken to the secure annex for containment and study." He gestured, and two more figures, built like brick walls, stepped from the shadows behind him. Clara felt Caius's hand tighten on her arm, his power beginning to coil. Before he could speak, before he could unleash the rage she knew was simmering just below the surface, she stepped forward. The two guards tensed. Alistair looked at her with mild, annoyed surprise. "Lord Alistair," Clara said, her voice clear and carrying in the damp air. "I believe there has been a misunderstanding. I am not a vessel. I am not a thing to be contained." She met his cold, ancient gaze without flinching. "I am Lady Clara, descendant of the first line. I am the partner of King Caius. And I am the one who destroyed Corvus." She let that sink in. Alistair's facade cracked, just a flicker of shock in his dead eyes. "The London Coven requested my presence to discuss a species-level threat," Clara continued, her voice hardening. "I am here to do just that. But let us be clear. I will not be taken anywhere. I go where I choose. And I choose to attend this meeting." She smiled, a small, cold smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Now, shall we go? Or did you bring us all the way to London just to stand in the rain?" Alistair was speechless. He had come prepared for a diplomatic incident with a furious king. He had not come prepared for Clara. He looked from her to Caius, who was watching the entire exchange with an expression of immense, predatory pride. Caius merely lifted an eyebrow, as if to say, "Well? You heard her." With a stiff, angry jerk of his head, Alistair turned. "Very well. The coven awaits." He led them, not to a waiting car, but to a plain, iron door in the stairwell. It opened onto a private lift, one that descended far, far deeper than the ground floor. The air grew colder, the scent of damp earth and centuries replacing the smell of the city. "Where are we going?" Clara asked, her hand finding Caius's again in the darkness of the descent. "Where they think they are strongest," Caius murmured, his golden eyes glowing in the gloom. "To the foundations. The Undercity." The lift chimed and the doors slid open, not onto a modern corridor, but onto a vast, torchlit cavern. It was an ancient, buried part of Roman London, its massive stone arches stretching into an oppressive darkness. And it was full. Dozens, perhaps hundreds, of vampires stood in the shadows, their eyes all turned to the entrance. They were the ancient, the powerful, the core of the old world. At the far end of the cavern, on a dais carved from the bedrock, sat three figures on thrones of stone. The Prime Coven. They had not been summoned to a meeting. They had been brought to a trial. Chapter 18. The cavern was a vast, cold tomb, and they were the only living things in it. 100 whispers died as they stepped from the lift. A sea of dead, ancient eyes, glinting in the torchlight, turned to watch them. The air was heavy with the pressure of their collective will, a psychic weight designed to crush and intimidate. Clara felt Caius's arm tense under her hand. His rage was a furnace banked low, his newfound vitality a stark, golden contrast to the grey, dusty power of the assembled coven. He was a living fire, and he had just walked into a crypt. She did not falter. She did not let his anger take the lead. She kept her chin high, her hand resting on his arm as if he were her escort. Together, they began the long walk down the center of the cavern toward the stone dais. Their footsteps were the only sound, echoing in the immense, oppressive silence. With every step, Clara felt the eyes of the vampires, cold, assessing, and full of a strange, hungry loathing. They were not just looking at her, they were looking at the sigil on her wrist, which she left uncovered. They stopped at the foot of the dais. The three figures on the stone thrones were the oldest beings Clara had ever seen. They were not just pale, they were calcified, their skin like white marble, their forms draped in shadows. The central figure, a woman whose eyes were like chips of obsidian, inclined her head. Her voice, when it came, was not a sound, but a vibration that seemed to issue from the stone itself. "Caius of the New World," she rasped. "You have come." It was not a welcome. It was an acknowledgement of a summons obeyed. Her obsidian gaze slid to Clara. It was heavy, invasive, and utterly devoid of humanity. "So, this is the anomaly. The mortal echo." "We are here at your urgent request, Elder Lyra," Clara said, her voice clear, sharp, and utterly unfazed. She would not let them define her. "You invoked the compact, claiming a species-level threat. We have come to discuss it." Lyra's lip, thin as a razor, curled. "You are the threat." "I am the one who ended the threat," Clara countered. "Corvus. The Ordo Dracal. A problem your ancient order allowed to fester." Corvus was a fool, a male elder to Lyra's right boomed, his voice like grinding gravel. He saw a weapon. He was short-sighted. "We see the truth. We see the disease." "Disease?" Clara asked, her voice dangerously quiet. It was Lyra who answered, her gaze now fixed on Caius, who had remained utterly, terrifyingly silent, his golden eyes burning. "You reek of it, Caius," Lyra hissed, a new, venomous energy in her voice. "You, who have been the very symbol of our cold eternity. You stand there, not as a king, but as a thing, thrumming with life. You stink of the sun." The cavern, which had been silent, erupted in a low, disgusted murmur. "Corvus wanted to walk in the day," Lyra continued, her voice rising, "but you have bonded with the cure. A walking antidote. A mortal corruption that unwrits what we are. You have brought the sun into the shadow world, and you call it queen." She rose slowly from her throne, her ancient form unfolding. The torchlight glinted off her eyes. "We call it pestilence." She raised a single, stone-like hand. "You were not brought here for a trial. You were brought here for cleansing. The compact was invoked to unite us. To excise the threat. And the threat, King Caius, is the living blood that now flows through your veins." Around the cavern, the hundreds of vampires who had been watching in silence took one, unified, menacing step forward. This was not a trial. It was an execution. Alistair's containment was a lie. They were here to destroy Clara, and to purge Caius of her influence, even if it meant destroying him, too. Caius's silence finally broke. He laughed. It was a low, dark, and utterly delighted sound that shocked the cavern into a stunned, new silence. He stepped slightly in front of Clara, his golden eyes sweeping over the crowd, his smile a terrifying flash of white. "You are right about one thing, Lyra," he said, his voice a soft, vibrating thunder. "I do stink of the sun." He turned his head, his gaze finding Clara's. The love and raw pride in his eyes was so potent it was a physical blow. "And I have never," he said, loud enough for every vampire in the cavern to hear, "felt more like a god." He turned back to the coven. "You want to cleanse the pestilence? You want to excise the threat?" He held his hand out, palm up. A orb of pure, golden light, sunlight, life, Clara's power, remade by him, ignited in his hand, bathing the ancient, grey cavern in the warm glow of a new dawn. "Come," he invited them. "And try." Chapter 19. The golden orb in Caius's hand was not just light, it was a sun. It pulsed with a living, vibrant warmth that was anathema to the cold, tomb-like air. The hundreds of vampires in the cavern did not burn, but they flinched. They shielded their eyes. They hissed, a sound like 1,000 angry snakes. This light was an offense. It was a physical, painful reminder of the world they had lost, the life they had traded for stale, cold eternity. "Blasphemy!" Lyra shrieked, her face contorting. The image of a calm, marble-like elder shattered, revealing the furious, terrified zealot beneath. "This is the corruption I spoke of. It is an abomination. You have brought the very sun into the heart of the shadow world." She pointed a gnarled, stone-like finger, not at Caius, but at Clara. You are the source of this plague. Seize her. Cleanse this place. The mass of vampires surged. The front line of enforcers, led by Lord Alistair, drew ancient, silver-edged blades, their faces masks of cold duty. Caius's smile vanished. The orb of light in his hand condensed, its warm glow turning into a tight, white-hot point of pure, destructive energy. He was ready to unmake the world. No. Clara's hand was on his arm. He looked down at her, his golden eyes wide with disbelief. Clara, they mean to kill you. I know, she said, her voice impossibly calm. And you're about to give them exactly the war they want. You'd kill hundreds, and they would still brand us the monsters. They are monsters, he snarled. They're afraid, she countered. She let go of his arm and took a half-step in front of him, facing the oncoming enforcers, who had paused, confused by this exchange. This is not a battle, Clara said, her voice ringing out, sharp and clear in the vast cavern. This is a diagnosis. Lyra, from her throne, sneered. The mortal raves. You called me a pestilence, Clara said, her gaze locking on Lyra. A disease. You're right. I am. The enforcers hesitated again. Caius watched, his own power held in a vibrating, perfect stillness, ready to be unleashed the second she was wrong. For thousands of years, Clara said, her voice carrying to every corner, you have prided yourselves on your control. Your coldness. Your stillness. You've turned immortality into a prison of stone. She looked at Alistair, whose blade was now pointed at her throat. When was the last time you felt anything, Lord Alistair? Other than this dusty sense of duty? When was the last time any of you wanted anything? Tasted food? Felt rain and didn't just find it inconvenient? Silence the mortal. Lyra commanded. But it was too late. Clara had planted a seed of doubt. She looked at Lyra. You're right. I am a plague. I am the plague of feeling. The disease of life. And you are all terrified of it. You know nothing. Lyra shrieked, rising from her throne. I know everything, Clara whispered. He showed me. She raised her hand. Not the one Caius had fed from, but the one that bore the sigil. She focused on the memory of the bond, that tidal wave of emotion she'd felt from Caius. His loneliness. His fear. His reawakened life. She did not create a ball of light. She did not throw a physical force. She pushed. The sigil on her wrist flashed, not with light, but with a wave of pure, invisible, psychic energy. It was the feeling of the sun on skin. The taste of fresh-baked bread. The ache of a lost love. The sharp, terrifying, beautiful pain of being alive. It swept over the first row of enforcers. It was not an attack. It was an overload. Alistair cried out, a raw, strangled sound, and staggered back, his silver blade clattering to the stone. He clutched his head, his eyes wide with a horror far greater than any physical threat. He was being assaulted by memories he had buried for 1,000 years. The other enforcers crumpled. They fell to their knees, some weeping, some gasping, all of them overwhelmed by the sudden, agonizing thaw of their frozen, calcified emotions. Their disease was their own humanity, given back to them in a single, crippling dose. The rest of the cavern stared, frozen in absolute terror. This was a power they had never seen, a weapon against which their ancient strength was useless. Clara held her hand up, the sigil a dark promise on her skin. Her gaze was fixed on Lyra, who was trembling, her face a mask of disbelief and pure, unadulterated fear. You wanted to study the anomaly, Clara said, her voice dangerously soft. You wanted to contain the threat. But you don't want to feel it. She looked at the cowering, moaning vampires at her feet, and then back to the terrified elder. You are not a coven, Clara declared, her voice full of a new, cold authority. You are a cult. A cult of cowards, hiding in the dark, afraid of the very life you pretend to have mastered. She lowered her hand. The discussion is over. Now, we will have a negotiation. And you, she said, pointing to Lyra, will be cleansed. Chapter 20. The cavern was a portrait of frozen chaos. At Clara's feet, The coven's strongest enforcers were incapacitated, curled on the stone floor, weeping for mothers they hadn't thought of in 1,000 years, or gasping, their hands over their hearts as if that long-dormant muscle had just been violently restarted. The hundreds of vampires lining the walls were as still as statues, their fear a palpable, icy fog. On the dais, Lyra's 2 fellow elders had shrunk back into their stone thrones, their marble-like faces cracked with disbelief. Lyra herself was trembling, her entire body vibrating with a rage so profound it was indistinguishable from terror. "This is your last chance," Clara said, her voice cutting through the whimpers of the fallen. "End this farce." "You, filth!" Lyra shrieked, her voice cracking. "You come into our world, our hall, and you defile them with mortal weakness." "You call it weakness," Clara said, and she began to walk. She moved through the path of broken enforcers, her gaze locked on Lyra. With every step, a vampire in the crowd flinched, as if she were walking on their graves. Caius did not move. He simply stood at the head of the aisle, the nuclear option in perfect, terrifying stillness. His golden eyes were a promise. "I will let this play out, but the moment you touch her, this cavern ceases to exist." Clara reached the foot of the dais. She looked up at the elder. "You call it weakness," Clara repeated, "because you are the weakest one here. You've spent 2 millennia hiding from one single memory." What?" Lyra hissed, confused. "What are you?" "The cleansing," Clara said. "You're right. It's time." Lyra's nerve broke. She would not be cleansed. She lunged, not with a blade, but with her own power. A wave of absolute, psychic cold, the essence of her ancient, calcified will, blasted from the throne. It was a force designed to stop a mortal heart, to freeze the blood, to inflict the very stillness she worshipped. Clara stopped, hit by the force of it. It was agony. A crushing, empty, soul-deep cold that promised oblivion. It was the peace Lyra was trying to sell. But Clara was not just a mortal. She was an anchor. She was bound to the hottest, most vital fire in the room. The sigil on her wrist flared, not with her own power, but with his. A golden echo of Caius's own protective rage surged, meeting the wave of cold and shattering it like a pane of glass. Clara gasped, the warmth returning instantly. She took the last step and placed her hand on the arm of Lyra's stone throne. Lyra, her power broken, recoiled as if Clara's hand were a hot iron. "You are so afraid of life," Clara whispered, her voice now only for the elder. "Because you are terrified of grief. You don't want to feel. You don't want to remember." Clara closed her eyes and, with her hand on the throne, she pushed. She didn't push life. She didn't push memories. She pulled. She reached into the elder's mind and found the memory Lyra had buried under 2,000 years of dust and ice, the one she was cleansing herself from over and over. The image flared in Clara's mind, a small village in Roman-era Britain. A hut burning. A tiny, cold hand. A single name, lost to time. Clara pushed the memory back at Lyra, not as a whisper, but as a scream. "Her name," Clara demanded, her voice echoing in the cavern. "Say her name." Lyra's face, the ancient mask of stone, crumbled. Her eyes, those obsidian chips, widened. And then, for the first time in millennia, they flooded with hot, living, agonizing tears. She let out a sound. It was not a word. It was a raw, human wail of such profound, animal grief that it shook the very foundations of the cavern. It was the sound of a mother who had just lost her child. She collapsed, sliding from the stone throne to the floor, a weeping, broken, ancient thing. The cavern was silent. The whimpering of the enforcers had stopped. Every vampire, from the lowest to the 2 elders still on the dais, was staring, not at Clara, but at the catastrophic, human wreck of their great leader. Clara had not killed her. She had not started a war. She had ended her. Clara stood, breathing heavily, and turned to face the hundreds of stunned, leaderless vampires. Caius was suddenly beside her. He had moved with impossible speed, and now he stood on the dais with her. He placed his hand on the back of the central throne, his golden eyes sweeping over the silent, terrified crowd. His voice was not a shout. It was a clear, final judgment. The compact is void, he announced. The London Quen is broken. Lyra's reign, and her cult of fear, is over. He looked down at the weeping elder at their feet, his gaze holding nothing but cold pity. A new order begins. One not of cold stone, but of ash and fire. The old law is dead. He turned and held his hand out to Clara, in full view of the entire old world. My queen, he said. Clara took his hand. The negotiation was over. This was a hostile takeover. And they had just won. Chapter 21. Clara's hand in his was a point of pure, living warmth in the vast, cold tomb. The title Caius had bestowed, my queen, hung in the air, a final, definitive stroke of judgment that sealed Lyra's fate and rewrote the world. The cavern was utterly silent, save for the broken, human sobs of the elder at their feet. The two remaining elders on the dais, their faces grey with terror, slid from their stone thrones. They did not just bow. They prostrated themselves on the floor, their ancient foreheads touching the rock. My king, my queen, the male elder whispered, his voice a dry rattle. We acknowledge the new accord. We submit. Lyra was deluded. A sickness. We are cleansed. We submit. Caius looked down at them with cold disdain. You are cowards. But your cowardice will serve. You will hold this territory in my name, and you will answer to her. He and Clara turned, not waiting for a reply. The audience was over. They walked, not with haste, but with the deliberate, unhurried pace of absolute victors. The hundreds of vampires lining the walls did not move. They did not breathe. They parted, creating a wide, reverent aisle, their eyes downcast, their fear a tangible, suffocating fog. Clara paused as they reached the enforcers she had broken. Alistair was on his hands and knees, his breath shuddering, his silver-black hair matted to his pale forehead. He was still trapped in the loop of resurrected grief, a man drowning in his own humanity. Caius's hand tensed on hers, ready to pull her away from the filth. Clara gently removed her hand from his and knelt beside the broken vampire. Alistair, she said, her voice quiet but firm. He flinched, curling in on himself. No, please. I can't. Look at me, she commanded. Slowly, his eyes, awash with 1,000 years of unshed tears, lifted to hers. He looked young and terrified. She made you a stone, Clara said softly. She taught you that this, she jested to his tears, was weakness. That it was a disease. She was wrong. It is a memory. It is your strength. She did not touch him. She simply held his gaze. You can stand up, Lord Alistair. You can hold this grief and it will not break you. It will make you whole. The cold is her poison. The feeling is the antidote. Now, feel it, and master it. She could not. Alistair's shuddering breaths began to slow. He stared at her, a dawning, terrible, and wondrous understanding in his eyes. He was not just a cog in a machine of duty. He was a person. Get up, she said, her voice hardening just a fraction. Cleanse this cavern of her cult. You will be her jailer. You will see that the new accord is held. And you will report to me. She stood. Alistair, with a shaky, newfound strength, pushed himself to his feet. He was no longer a hollow enforcer. He looked at her, his face a ruin, and for the first time, gave a true bow. My queen. Clara nodded once, took Caius's waiting hand, and they walked the rest of the way. As they stepped into the lift, the heavy iron doors sliding shut, they were left in a sudden, intimate silence. The sound of Lyra's distant, broken wail was cut off. Clara sagged against the wall, her legs finally weak. Okay, now I'm shaking. Caius was beside her in an instant. The king was gone. He pulled her into his arms, his hold no longer just possessive, but infinitely gentle, as if she were made of spun glass. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling. In all my immortal life, he murmured against her ear, his voice thick with a raw, new emotion. I have never, ever, seen anything like that. You did not just defeat them, Clara. You remade them. He pulled back, his golden eyes blazing with a pride so fierce it stole her breath. You are a terrifying creature. She let out a shaky laugh, her hands clutching the front of his coat. Says the man who was about to incinerate 1,000 vampires. That was just brute force, he said, a dismissive wave of his hand. Any ancient can do that. What you did, you wielded life itself. You are the true power here, Clara. I am just the weapon you point. The dislocation was instantaneous. The cold, damp air of the London rooftop was a shock after the recycled air of the lift. Marcus and a full complement of Umbra were waiting, their faces pale and taut, their hands on weapons, clearly expecting a war. They saw Caius and Clara emerge, not just unharmed, but changed. Caius was a golden-eyed god, and Clara was the one he was holding. My king, my lady, Marcus breathed, his eyes wide, taking in their united front. The situation, Caius said, his arms sliding possessively around Clara's waist as he guided her toward the shadowfold that would take them home, is resolved. They stepped from the penthouse elevator, the first light of a new dawn already spilling across the marble floor. The contrast was staggering. From a cold, dark, ancient tomb, to this. A home, filled with light. Caius stood at the window, not flinching from the sun, but welcoming it. He was truly daywalking now, the bond sealed and settled. Clara walked to the desk, her fingers tracing the holographic projection of her bistro. The 3-story building. The embassy. The empire. It wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was a blueprint. Caius came to stand beside her, his warmth a solid presence. It seems Queen is no longer a title of affection, he said, his voice a low, satisfied rumble. It is a statement of political fact. He looked at the plans, then at her. The London Coven is yours. My council is yours. Where do we begin, my partner? Clara looked at the empty, ash-filled lot on the screen. She thought of the cold, broken vampires in the cavern. We begin here, she said, her finger tapping the glass. They're all afraid of the life I'm offering. It's time we showed them what it looks like. She smiled, a true, warm smile, and looked up at him. Let's build our embassy. Chapter 22. Clara woke up in a room she had never seen before. It was not Caius's dark, shadowed chamber. This room was at the east corner of the penthouse, and its glass walls were designed to catch the dawn. The sun, a brilliant, unfiltered orange, was pouring in, bathing the room in a warmth that was almost shocking. She was in a bed with simple, light gray linens, not the heavy, dark silks. The furniture was modern, comfortable, and bore no trace of ancient, Gothic history. A data pad rested on the nightstand, glowing with the blueprints for the new sage leaf. This was not a guest room. It was her room. She sat up, a real, slow, human stretch, feeling the pull of muscles she hadn't known she'd strained. She felt rested. Whole. A soft knock, so civilized it was almost comical, came from the door. Come in, she said. The door slid open, and Caius entered. He was not the Dark King or the Furious Warrior. He was dressed in a simple, dark gray sweater and trousers, his feet bare on the marble floor. And he was holding 2 ceramic mugs. He stopped, mid-stride. He wasn't looking at her. He was looking at the beam of direct, unfiltered morning sun that was cutting across the floor. Slowly, as if testing a patch of ice, he stepped into it. He closed his eyes. His face, no longer pale but warmed by their bond, tilted up to the light. He was basking. It doesn't hurt, he murmured, his voice full of a childlike, 1,000-year-old wonder. It's warm. I had forgotten. He opened his golden eyes and looked at her, and the simple adoration in his gaze was more potent than any declaration of power. Good morning, my queen. He walked through the sunbeam and handed her one of the mugs. It was coffee. Real, hot, and perfectly made. Good morning, she replied, her voice a little thick. She took a sip, the familiar, bitter warm taste a grounding rod to this impossible new reality. He sat on the edge of the bed, not as a king, but as a partner. You've been awake for 10 minutes. I've been waiting for your heartbeat to change. That's terrifying, she said, but she was smiling. And also, apparently, my new normal. I find I am protective of your rest, he said, as if admitting a strange new hobby. He sipped from his own mug. Clara glanced at it. "What are you?" "Blood." "Warned," he said, as casually as she might say cream and sugar. Marcus found a way to heat it without coagulating it. "It's civilized." They sat in silence for a moment, two rulers in a sun-drenched room, drinking their respective morning beverages. The domesticity of it was more profound, more revolutionary than the battle in the cavern. "So," Clara said, gesturing to the data pad. "Our embassy. How do we do this? I'm used to permits, bank loans. I'm guessing you have a different system." "A slightly more efficient one," he said. He took the that pad, his thumb sweeping across the screen. "I acquired the city's top architectural firm 3 years ago. I've also acquired the top 3 construction companies. I called them last night. The lot," he tapped the ash-filled square, "will be cleared by sundown. The foundation will be poured by Tuesday. Your embassy will be ready in 1 month." Clara stared at him, the coffee mug halfway to her lips. 1 month? "Caius, that's a 3-story, custom-built commercial property. That's a 2-year build. At least." "It is a 1-month build," he corrected gently, "when you are not paying the labor, and they are working 24-hour shifts out of a profound, existential terror of their new silent partner." He smiled, a dark, quick flash. "They are highly motivated." Clara let out a shaky laugh. This was her new power. Not just the psychic waves, but the ability to literally move mountains, or at least, construction crews, at a speed mortals couldn't dream of. A respectful chime sounded at the door. "My king, my lady." "The morning reports," Marcus's voice called. "Enter," Caius said, not moving from the bed. Marcus entered, datapad in hand, and came to a full stop. He was clearly looking at his king, in a sweater, sitting on a bed, in a sunbeam, drinking. Marcus, a vampire of impeccable, centuries-old control, simply blinked. He cleared his throat. "My apologies. There are the reports." "Go on, Marcus," Caius said, enjoying his regent's confusion. "Yes. Right." Marcus composed himself. "London. Lord Alistair reports that Lyra is contained. The Undercity is pacified. He has also," Marcus scrolled, his face a mask of confusion, "sent a request. He wishes to know what emotional auditing protocols he should be implementing with the other coven leaders. He seems to believe, my lady, that you have a curriculum." Clara choked on her coffee. "A curriculum?" "He is a very literal man, my lady," Marcus said, deadpan. "He seems to be taking his new duties as jailer very seriously. He has also sent a tribute. The entire collection of Roman-era artifacts from the British Museum's private vault." "Gifts," Caius murmured, looking at Clara. "You have broken them so completely that they are sending you gifts. Put them in the vault." "And the Home Council," Marcus continued, "has sent their own. The deed to a platinum mine in Russia and a letter of apology so groveling I believe the parchment is actually damp." "Good," Caius said. "One more item," Marcus said. He was no longer looking at Caius. He was looking at Clara. His demeanor was one of pure, professional respect. He held out a thin, separate datapad. "The matter of your sister, Christine." Clara's small, warm smile faded. She put her coffee mug down. "She is in exile, as you commanded," Marcus said, his voice neutral. "We have secured a high-end apartment for her in Geneva. Her accounts are frozen, save for a small stipend. She is unhappy. But she is safe." Clara took the datapad. It was a file. A few photos. Christine, looking furious, in a beautiful apartment she couldn't leave. A transcript of a call to her parents, who were still on their cruise, which had been politely intercepted. The forgettable sister looked at the file of her perfect sister, who was now, for the first time in her life, truly powerless. "She will remain in Geneva," Clara said, her voice cold and clear. "The stipend is too generous. Halve it. And I want a weekly report. I want to know if she's learning." Caius watched her, his golden eyes bright, not with disapproval, but with that same fierce pride from the cavern. My lady, Marcus said, bowing his head. He took the datapad back. It will be done. He left, closing the door quietly behind him. Clara looked at her hands. That was the first true command she had given as a ruler. It was cold. It was calculated. And it felt right. She was not that girl in the bistro anymore. She looked up at Caius, the day-walking king, and held up her empty mug. More coffee. He took the mug, his smile slow and real. After you. We have an empire to build. Chapter 23. Efficient was an understatement. By 4 p.m. that same day, Clara stood not at a window, but on the new, temporary sidewalk at 1428 Elm Street. The name, The Sage Leaf, scorched but defiant, still hung on a piece of charred signboard that one of the crew had respectfully propped against the new plywood barrier. The entire lot was not just cleared, it was excavated. The mountains of ash, charred wood, and melted glass were gone, trucked away by a silent, non-stop fleet of vehicles. A massive, perfectly squared hole now sat waiting, its edges so precise they looked like they'd been cut by a laser. Dozens of mortal workers, all clad in new, unbranded black uniforms, moved with a frantic, silent speed. They didn't shout. They didn't whistle. They communicated in hand signals, their movements a choreographed ballet of terror and efficiency. This was Caius's highly motivated crew. Overseeing them, standing at the four corners of the site, were 4 of the Umbra. They were in their dark suits, unmoving, their mere presence serving as the most effective project management tool in human history. They're afraid of your men, Clara said, her voice low. She was dressed in dark jeans, boots, and a simple black jacket. Her queen uniform, she decided, was one of practicality. They are, Caius agreed. He stood beside her, a half-step behind, in a simple dark coat. He was projecting consort, not king. He was her shadow, her guard, and her power, all in one. The street, cordoned off for a block in every direction, was completely, ear-kingly, silent. Mr. Caius. A man in a hard hat, his face pale and sweating despite the November chill, was jogging toward them, a set of rolled-up blueprints in his hand. He was the site foreman, and he was visibly trembling. He came to a stop a careful 6 feet away, his eyes fixed on Caius, refusing to look at Clara. Sir. We've hit the depth you required. The soil density it's perfect. As you said it would be. We're ready to lay the foundation forms. He was panting, as if he'd run a marathon. Caius was silent for a long, cold beat. The foreman's breathing hitched, turning into a terrified wheeze. Then, Caius simply gestured, a small, elegant flick of his chin toward Clara. She is the architect. She is the client. She is the one you will address. The foreman's blood drained from his face. He looked at Clara as if he'd just been told to negotiate with a live bomb. He had seen her get out of the car. He had seen the way the king deferred to her. He was, to put it mildly, petrified. He finally squeaked, his voice cracking. My apologies. I didn't. Clara gave him a small, kind smile. It seemed to terrify him even more. It's all right, Mr. Henderson. Brian Henderson. Mr. Henderson, Clara said, stepping forward. She didn't take the blueprints. Instead, she looked at the datapad in her own hand, the one Caius had given her, which was now synced to every laser level, drone, and sensor on the site. You're a fast worker, Mr. Henderson. The excavation is immaculate, she said. He puffed up, just a fraction. Thank you. We pride ourselves on. Which is why you're going to be so upset when I tell you to fix the western wall, Clara said, her voice still perfectly pleasant. Brian Henderson's smile froze and shattered. Clara tapped her datapad, and a 3D model of the excavation site appeared. She highlighted a section. Your laser slicer was miscalibrated. By 3.2 degrees. It's resulted in a 2-inch deviation from true vertical. If we pour the foundation on that, the entire structure's load-bearing capacity will be compromised by, she did a quick, internal calculation, 4.8%. She looked up from the pad, her gaze sharp but not unkind. Fix it. Then you can lay the forms. Henderson stared at her. He was not just stunned by her command, he was stunned by her competence. She hadn't guessed. She hadn't gestured vaguely. She had given him data. He grabbed his own, suddenly primitive-looking tablet and did a furious set of calculations. His eyes went wide. My God, he whispered. You're right. I'll fix it immediately. Right away. He turned, not just a terrified worker, but a deeply, professionally impressed one. He ran back to his crew, shouting, "The West Wall! Slice the West Wall! Now!" Clara watched him go, then turned. Caius was looking at her, his golden eyes blazing, his face split by a smile of such profound, possessive pride that it made her heart skip a beat. A 4.8% deviation, he murmured, stepping up beside her, his voice a low rumble just for her. "I might have rounded," she admitted. "You are, without a doubt, the most terrifying creature I have ever met," he said, and it was the highest compliment he could give. He laced his fingers with hers, a public, proprietary gesture. Clara looked at the hole in the ground, the place where her life had burned to ash. And she looked at the new, perfectly vertical wall her crew was now slicing. "Good," she said, squeezing his hand. "Let's go. I need to approve the steel order." Chapter 24. They were walking the perimeter of the site, Clara pointing out where she wanted the fresh herb gardens planted, Caius listening with an intensity he normally reserved for geopolitical strategy. The mid-afternoon sun was warm, and he was, for the first time, enjoying it. Then he stopped. His head lifted, not in a human gesture of listening, but in the sharp, sudden motion of a predator. His fingers, laced with Clara's, tightened to a point of pain. "Caius?" she asked, her voice low. He didn't answer. His golden eyes narrowed, and his nostrils flared. A low, almost subsonic growl began in his chest. "Something is wrong." "What?" she asked, scanning the street. The mortal workers were still moving, oblivious. The umbra at the corners, however, had all gone rigid, their heads turning in unison toward the eastern cordon. "The scent," Caius hissed, pulling Clara half a step behind him. The shift from loving partner to primal guardian was instantaneous. Old. Wet earth. Pine. And... He spat the word as if it were poison. "Wolf." Clara's mind flashed back to the dart that had poisoned him. "Wolfsbane." "No," he said, his voice a guttural snarl. "The genuine article. Lupine." A single figure had walked past the street-closed barrier. It was a woman. She was tall, with a powerful, athletic build, and a wild mane of auburn hair. She wore jeans, heavy boots, and a worn leather jacket, a practical uniform that mirrored Clara's own. She was walking with a rolling, confident gait that was utterly unconcerned by the perimeter. Two of the Umbra moved to intercept her. They were a blur of vampiric speed, intending to flank and subdue her before she'd taken 3 more steps. It was a mistake. The woman didn't even stop walking. She saw them coming, and with a movement too fast for Clara's human eyes to track, she moved. She didn't attack them, she simply collided with them. She grabbed the first Umbra by the suit jacket and used his own momentum to hurl him, with impossible, explosive strength, into the second. The 2 vampires, beings who could punch through concrete, were sent tumbling head over an excavation truck, landing in a heap of tangled limbs and profound shock. The woman dusted her hands on her jeans and kept walking, her gaze fixed on Caius and Clara. The other 2 Umbra drew weapons. Caius's power exploded, a wave of cold, killing intent. "You will not." "Stand down," Clara commanded, her voice sharp. Caius froze, his snarl caught in his throat. He looked at her, his golden eyes wide, furious, and confused. The Umbra also paused, their weapons trained. "This is an embassy, right?" Clara said, her heart hammering, but her voice steady. "We don't shoot the first ambassador who shows up unannounced. Even if she's rude." She stepped out from behind Caius. The woman stopped about 20 feet away, a safe, respectful distance. She had a scattering of freckles and the brightest, wildest green eyes Clara had ever seen. She looked at Clara, then at Caius, and her nose wrinkled in a way that was almost, comically, canine. "So, it's true," the woman said, her voice a low, smoky alto. "The old king of the leeches smells like the sun. And—" Her gaze settled on Clara, sharp and assessing. You're the human. You smell like him, but you're still warm. You're the one who broke the world." "I am Clara," she said, ignoring the leech comment. "And you are?" "The name is Sasha," the woman said. "Emissary of the Alpha of the Eastern Seaboard." "A werewolf," Caius stated. The ancient, primal hatred in his voice was so thick it was almost tangible. "You are far from your territory, dog." Sasha's green eyes flashed, and her lips curled back, just a fraction, to reveal teeth that were a little too sharp. "And you, corpse, are making noise for the first time in a century. You topple the London Coven. You start walking in the day. You build this fortress in the middle of a city." Her gaze hardened. "The moon has always kept its treaty with the shadow. But you are not a creature of shadow anymore. You have changed the rules. You've upset the balance. And the Alpha, he does not like it." "We are not bound by your treaty," Caius snarled. "You were," Sasha countered. "Because you were predictable. You were cold. You were manageable. Now—" She looked at Clara again, her focus intense. "Now, you have this. A walking, talking, mortal battery. A miracle. An abomination. She's not just your weakness, King. She's your new, untold strength." Sasha took a half-step closer, her eyes never leaving Clara's. "My Alpha is curious. He wants to know what happens when a vampire king stops being a vampire. And he wants to know what you are." "I am his partner," Clara said. Sasha laughed, a short, barking sound. "You're his leash. Or maybe he's yours. Either way, the pack is concerned. When the sun starts walking in the day, the moon takes notice. The Alpha demands a meeting. He wants to see the anomaly for himself." "I demand nothing," Caius growled. "You will leave this city, or you will be buried beneath it." "I'm not asking, King," Sasha said, her smile vanishing. "I'm telling. You're not the only ancient power in this world. And unlike those dusty, stone-faced cowards in London, we are not afraid of feeling." She pointed at Clara. "The Alpha will be in this city on the next full moon. That's 3 days from now. He expects you to present yourselves. If you don't, we'll take it as an act of war. And we," her smile was all teeth, "are very good at war." Chapter 25. The air on the construction site was no longer just silent, it was locked in a state of suspended, primal terror. The mortal work crews were frozen, their tools halfway to their tasks. The Umbra were rigid, their weapons still aimed at the spot where the 2 down guards were just now, painfully, getting to their feet. Caius was a statue of pure, condensed fury. The ancient, primal animosity between his kind and theirs was a chasm he had no desire to bridge. His golden eyes were fixed on Sasha's retreating back, his entire body vibrating with the restraint it was taking not to turn her into a red smear on the pavement. "You will not live to see the full moon," he whispered, the threat a low, deadly promise. Sasha, who was almost at the street barrier, paused. She turned her head, looking back over her shoulder, a wolfish, challenging grin splitting her face. "See? This is the problem," she called out, her voice full of mocking amusement. "No control. All rage. The Alpha was right. You're not a king, you're a rabid dog. And she," her gaze flicked to Clara, "is holding your leash." The insult was calculated. It was designed to do one thing, ignite. Caius lunged. He didn't move a foot before Clara's hand was flat on his chest. It was not a plea. It was a physical, commanding shove. "Caius! Stand! Down!" The word down was an order, and it hit him with the force of the bond. He stopped, his lunge aborted, his snarl caught in his throat. He looked from Sasha to the Umbra, and then down at Clara's hand, which was pressed firmly against his heart. The struggle was visible, a war between his ancient, violent instincts and his new, all-consuming devotion. He was breathing heavily, his fangs partially extended, his golden eyes burning. But he held. Sasha's mocking grin faded, replaced by a look of sharp, genuine curiosity. This was the real anomaly. A human, leashing the king. Clara kept her hand on Caius's chest, a physical anchor, as she stepped forward, putting herself partially in front of him. Her heart was hammering, but her voice was pure ice. "Your alpha is concerned," she said, her voice carrying across the silent sight, "and curious. But he sends an enforcer to deliver a threat." "That's not curiosity, Sasha. That's fear." Sasha bristled, her posture stiffening. "The pack does not fear." "Don't you?" Clara challenged, her voice as sharp as the one she'd used on the coven. "You're afraid of change. You're afraid of what you don't understand. You're afraid because for the first time in 1,000 years, your ancient enemy can stand in the sun, and you don't know what that means for the moon." "We are nothing like those stone-faced cowards in London," Sasha snarled, deeply insulted. "Then prove it," Clara shot back. "You came here to mark your territory. To pick a fight. To piss on a fire hydrant to see if the owner would come out shouting." Sasha's eyes flashed a dangerous, lupine green. "You have a sharp tongue, little mortal." "And I have a sharp mind," Clara said. "So here are our terms. You will go back to your alpha and you will tell him that the king and queen of this city do not answer a demand from anyone. We will not be presented to him." She gestured to the massive, excavated hole beside them. "This is our new embassy. Our ground. The place where the new rules are being written. We will grant your alpha an audience. Here. On the full moon, as he requested." Sasha scoffed. "Here? In this mud pit? It's not neutral territory." "It's my territory," Clara stated, her voice iron. "Tell him he is welcome to come and learn the new rules. Or he can stay in his woods and hide, wondering what we'll do next. The choice is his." She held up a hand. "One more condition. He will come with no more than 2 of his guard. Any more will be seen as an act of aggression. And we," she glanced back at Caius, who was now, despite his rage, smiling that terrifying, proud smile, "are very, very good at ending aggression." The challenge was laid. Sasha was cornered. She had come for a brawl or a surrender, and instead, she'd been handed a high-stakes diplomatic counteroffer. She studied Clara, then the silent, smiling king behind her. She saw the bond. She saw the partnership. "I will deliver your message," Sasha said, her tone now grudgingly respectful. "But be warned, little queen. My alpha is not a vampire. He is not cold. He is all feeling, all rage. And he is not as easily impressed as your king." She gave a curt nod, a sign of respect not to Caius, but to Clara. Then, without a backward glance, she turned and disappeared into the city. The moment she was gone, the tension on the site snapped. The workers all let out a collective, shuddering breath. Caius's rage returned, but it was no longer aimed at the departed wolf. "You have just invited their alpha," he said, his voice a low growl, "onto our land. Onto your embassy, in 3 days." "Yes," Clara said, finally letting her own hand drop, though she was shaking slightly. "We have. It's a hole in the ground, Clara. Then we have 72 hours to fix that," she said, turning to look at the massive, empty pit. She looked at Mr. Henderson, who was white as a sheet, and then at the Umbra. "Get him back here." Mr. Henderson was at her side in an instant, his entire body quivering. "The foundation," Clara said, her voice all business, "is no longer being poured on Tuesday. It's being poured in 2 hours. And I need a secure, temporary structure built in the center of it by sunup, Wednesday. Something impressive. Can you do that, Mr. Henderson?" Henderson looked at the Umbra, who was staring at him, and then at the king, who was smiling at him. He squeaked, I can build you the pyramids in 3 days. Absolutely. Yes. Good, Clara said. She took Caius's hand, lacing her fingers with his. The primal anger was still there, but it was now banked, overshadowed by his pride. An embassy needs a seat of power, Caius murmured, looking at the pit. We will need a throne. Clara looked at him, the adrenaline from the confrontation with Sasha draining away, replaced by the cold, stark reality of the deadline. "We need more than a throne, Caius," she said, her voice low and steady. "We need a fortress. And we have 72 hours. She turned to the trembling Mr. Henderson, who had been waiting, frozen, a few feet away. "Mr. Henderson," she called, her voice pure, cold command. "Your 2 weeks foundation just became a 72-hour, all-hands-on-deck miracle. I want a secure, steel-reinforced, one-story structure in the center of this pit by sundown, Wednesday. No excuses. No sleep." Henderson, seeing the unblinking Umbra and the golden-eyed king at her side, just nodded, his face pale but resolute. "Yes, it'll be done." He turned and ran, shouting into his radio. Instantly, the site exploded into a new, frantic, and impossible surge of activity. The sun was beginning to dip below the skyline, casting long, dramatic shadows into the pit. Caius stepped up beside her, his gaze fixed on the flurry of motion. "They will come expecting a hole in the ground," he murmured, his voice a low vibration of pride and anticipation. "They will find a fortress, and its queen." Clara looked into the pit where her life had burned down, the roar of a dozen new excavators sounding like the first drumbeat of the coming war. The full moon was 3 days away. "Let them come," she said.